I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Russia has issued a new threat to the West. The Kremlin is warning of possible retaliation as leaders in Finland and Sweden move to join NATO, saying if there are NATO detachments in those territories, they would become a possible target for a strike. Now, Finland and its citizens are preparing bunkers across the country. Meanwhile, the UK Defense Ministry says Russia has failed to make any significant advances in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, and Russian troops suffered, quote, significant loss while attempting to cross a river there. Foreign correspondent Tom Sufi-Burridge joins me live from Kyiv, Ukraine, with more on this. Tom, how significant is this counterstrike from Ukraine against Russian troops in the Donbas?
Well, we've seen the Ukrainians making incremental gains, Diane, up near Kharkiv. That's the second biggest city of Ukraine. So interesting situation there. In terms of the Donbass, the British Ministry of Defence just briefing journalists and effectively saying that there's really been no change there, that the Russians are trying to break through Ukrainian lines. They don't say it's a stalemate. They say that this is a really important time. It could be a tipping point, and it really is a watch-and-see situation to see whether or not the Ukrainians, remember, they've got all this new armour, all this new weaponry supplied by the United States and its allies, artillery cannons, the type of artillery that they just haven't had before, with longer range and better accuracy. It's a crucial point to see whether or not the Russians can break through, or whether the Ukrainians can hold them back or even make gains themselves.
Seriously, do you think Finland and Sweden should take this threat from Russia, that they could be targeted if they join NATO? And could the risk be higher if they don't?
I think it's predictable rhetoric from the Kremlin. We've seen this kind of rhetoric before in relation to Ukraine and in relation to NATO and NATO partners. But there is that threat. The rhetoric from Moscow has been fiery. They haven't ruled out the nuclear option. But interestingly, a few days ago, a senior Kremlin official saying on that nuclear threat that actually Russia would only launch it in response to a US nuclear strike. So there is a lot of fiery language. For me, at the moment, a lot of it's predictable.
Now, the U.S. is behind Finland and Sweden joining NATO, but not all members are on board. Turkey's president says that it could actually veto their bids to join. So what are the concerns on Turkey's part, and do you think other member nations could lobby for their approval?
No, I think Turkey, Diane, is trying to play a double game. Turkey's always had a close relationship with Ukraine, financially, economically, geographically. It's not far away. They've even supplied drones to the Ukrainian military, which have been used to high effect in this war. At the same time, Putin and Erdogan of Turkey have been close over the years. And therefore, I think by even entertaining the idea of vetoing Finland and Sweden entering NATO, Erdogan is potentially kind of throwing a bone, if you like, to the Russians. Let's see whether the United States and its allies now wade in, put pressure on the Turks, and let's see whether or not they will veto this or not.
Now, meanwhile, the UK is leveling new sanctions against Russia. What's the latest on that?
Well, these are the latest round of sanctions. We've seen a vast array of sanctions from a huge number of countries, particularly NATO countries. The latest sanctions are actually targeting, from the UK, Putin's inner circle. So it includes, interestingly, a woman, a former ice skater, who is rumoured to have been Vladimir Putin's lover at one point. And on top of that, also his ex-wife and members of his wider family. So the UK trying to target people close to Putin's inner circle. To be honest, I think these sanctions might have a limited impact. You know, it might mean that these people won't be able to travel to the UK, for example. It would mean if they had assets in the UK, those assets could be frozen. But let's be honest, those people have had a lot of time to move their assets out of the United Kingdom and other places like that.
All right, Tom Sufi-Burridge, great to talk to you, Tom. Thank you. Stay safe. And President Biden is taking new steps to try to ease a growing nationwide baby formula shortage. The White House says the president has spoken with manufacturers about how they can increase production and with major retailers about how to quickly restock shelves. Senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest.
With pressure mounting, the White House is taking action to try and address the baby formula crisis. urging states to allow families to use federal aid to buy more brands, taking steps to import more formula, and cracking down on price gouging. But the White House unable to say when the shortages will end.
If you are a parent who's looking for formula right now, struggling to find what you need, do you have even a rough guess of how long these shortages are going to last? What should parents be bracing for here?
Well, we've already seen an increase in supply over the past couple of weeks. We're taking every step to increase that. So our message to parents is we hear you. We want to do everything we can.
Now Congress is demanding answers. ABC News learning exclusively that the House Oversight Committee is launching an investigation.
It's a crisis. We are taking steps to correct it, and we will make sure that it does not happen again.
Across the country, parents worried, frustrated, scrambling to find formula.
What happens when we can't find it? Does your baby just starve?
In stores, the shelves empty, an estimated 40% of brands out of stock.
Not only can we not find it, but when we do find it, there's always a 20% markup on it.
On eBay, one specialty formula for infants with a milk allergy now selling more than double its normal price. Hoarding is also a big concern. Companies like CVS and Walgreens now limiting purchases to 3 per customer. Now, critics say the White House dropped the ball here, that the president should have acted sooner and that these steps he's announced so far are simply too modest to really address this shortage. Now, some are even calling for the president to invoke the Defense Production Act to try and boost manufacturing. The White House isn't going that far just yet, but they haven't ruled it out. But, Diane, as you may know, this really is a real problem. I can attest to this myself. I went to 7 stores yesterday before finding formula for my own daughter. And right now, Washington just can't say with any certainty when this shortage will end.
Yep, with my own baby at home, we are on the same boat, Mary Bruce. Thank you. And political reporter Brittany Shepard joins me live now for more on this. Brittany, the FDA says it's working to correct issues that it found during an inspection of an Abbott plant in Michigan. How's that contributing to this shortage?
So, Diane, this Abbott plant back in February found some issues with their formula. Infants were getting sick, and in fact, I believe even one infant passed away. And of course, production's been halted ever since then, and now they're looking to redo some of their formula, but none of this stuff's going to happen quickly. The FDA at Abbott is saying it could take 6 to 8 weeks once the FDA approves a formula, and that approval process could take 2 weeks. And that means that mothers are going to be left with hungry babies, far into the late spring and early summer.
What impact could these actions that the Biden administration is taking, what can that do for this shortage?
Well, the White House hopes it'll do something. They've done a couple things, including talking to CEOs of major retailers like Walmart and Target to see what they can do to increase production and to how quickly they can get stuff from trucks to shelves. They've also called on the FTC to stop price gouging. I mean, we saw in Mary's package, people are selling formula for $300, $400 on Amazon, and imagine what's going to be on eBay. And so the White House is trying to curb that access problem that many, many mothers, especially mothers of color and low-income mothers, are going to be struggling. But of course, beyond the White House pulling these strings, there's not much they can do beyond doing the Defense Production Act, and that's still in flux.
Meanwhile, a lawyer for WNBA star Brittany Griner says her pretrial detention, I should say, in Russia has been extended for a month, saying that's an indication her trial could start soon. What's the latest on the administration's efforts to get her released?
Well, it's a delicate tightrope walk for the White House and senior advisors who are exploring every diplomatic channel that they can. They've already said that Brittany's detention is untoward, and they're working their hardest. There's even some discussions today between her and Russia that maybe they'll do some kind of prisoner swap.
All right, Brittany Shepard in D.C. for us. Thank you.
Anytime.
And it's been more than 2 years since COVID-19 was first reported in the U.S. Now, with 1 million lives lost nationwide, scientists and health officials are still learning about its long-term effects on the many more who've survived. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are so-called COVID long haulers, some battling crippling symptoms well after their diagnosis. Broadway conductor Joel Fram is one of those long haulers. You might remember we spoke to Joel last month about the support that he was getting to help with his symptoms. And Joel and Dr. David Petrino, the director of the Rehabilitation Innovation for Mount Sinai Health System, are both joining me live now to talk more about this. And Dr. Petrino, I want to start with you. Your team has treated thousands of long-haul COVID patients. What has your experience been, and what do you think is unusual about how this has all unfolded from when you started until now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest challenge here has been that we have an entirely new chronic condition that is causing severe disability in actually millions of Americans and tens of millions of people worldwide. And there's been so little of a response initially to allow people who are struggling with these symptoms to access adequate care, and we need to move fast to improve that.
Now, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, 10 to 30% of Americans who get COVID experience these kind of long-term symptoms. So can you just briefly explain what long-term COVID is and what some of the more common symptoms are?
Yeah, absolutely. We think about long COVID as something that we would call an infection-associated chronic illness. So we don't quite understand the underlying cause that is causing all of these long-term symptoms, but it leaves individuals who had an acute COVID event with extreme persistent fatigue, something we call post-exertional malaise, which is a worsening of symptoms after exertion, cognitive impairments, heart issues, lung issues, and also a number of other very personalized symptoms. At last count, we were tracking over 200 symptoms affecting 10 different organ systems.
And I know these effects can get pretty serious, debilitating. Joel, I want to go to you on that. When did you realize that you were experiencing these symptoms post-COVID, and what were they?
So I came down with COVID in March of 2020, and it took about 3 weeks for me to get over that initial bout of COVID. And then for about a month, I actually felt like I was getting better. I was doing yoga, I was doing an aerobic exercise plan. But I remember it was a 28-day exercise plan, and on day 26, all of a sudden, it was like someone flipped a switch. My body just could not get through the first 5 minutes of the aerobic exercise. And I remember having to just lay my head down on my kitchen table. The fatigue was crushing. So for me, in the next couple months, the fatigue was really bad. I developed ocular migraine in my left eye. My joints would swell up. And I would also get breathless doing very normal things like walking up the stairs, from the subway. So it was really scary because I thought I was done with COVID, and I realized fairly quickly that these symptoms were persistent. And not only were they persistent, but they were really interfering with my day-to-day activities.
I know it's been a very long journey for you to get to where you are now. One, how long did it take to connect the dots that this was long COVID that was affecting you? And what was the process of rehabilitation like?
Well, in many ways, I am very, very fortunate. My father was a doctor. My sister is a cardiologist. So I actually had access to medical knowledge. Also, I am pretty strong in terms of patient self-advocacy. So I was doing the research myself. But I would say by the summer, by June, I was convinced that, yes, this was long COVID. And I remember I actually heard about the Mount Sinai Long Haul Clinic. And so I called them, and they were unbelievably nice. And they said, listen, this is exactly why we're here, but the next appointment isn't for 6 months. So I really had 6 months of waiting in order to be seen. And this is, of course, because we were in the middle of one of the big surges in the pandemic, and a lot of people were suddenly experiencing long COVID as well. So they were probably quite overwhelmed. But it was a scary 6 months because I was getting worse and worse. And when I was at the clinic, I was very fortunate to see many specialists. But, and I'm sure you've heard this story before, all of my tests were coming back negative. My heart was fine, my lungs were fine, my kidneys were fine, my brain was fine, which in one way is good news, but it also doesn't explain why you're going through the symptoms you are, and it can be very, very frustrating. And so I was feeling at a dead end. And I think the one thing that people don't talk about enough in long COVID is the mental health issues that arise when you're facing what could be a chronic disease with really no known cure. So I would say that finding Dr. Petrino's clinic, where there was definitely a protocol for aerobic rehabilitation, was the start of my getting better.
And how difficult that would be when you're searching for answers and you just can't find them. Dr. Petrino, why do some symptoms eventually improve for some COVID long haulers and not others? And how do vaccines factor into all of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, I'm so proud and happy that we were able to help Joel, and we've been able to help hundreds of patients that are similar to Joel. I think we need to understand that long COVID is very likely many different conditions. So we have had many patients who respond to rehabilitation in the way that Joel has, and we have many other patients who require a much more gentle and considered approach in the rehabilitation process. And so really the big thing that we're struggling with right now is a lack of an understanding of the underlying cause of long COVID, and that's where we need a lot of research efforts right now.
So how do vaccines factor in? Does that improve someone's care? What do long COVIDers have to consider on that front? And what happens if someone like Joel gets COVID again?
Yeah, these are all great questions. Right now, as we're trying to study the effects of the vaccine on long COVID, there doesn't appear to be a solid understanding of whether or not vaccines will prevent individuals from getting long COVID. There's two variables at play. The first is the variant of COVID that you get initially, and then the other variable is how many times you've been vaccinated. So right now we're seeing long COVID rates generally drop off, but we're not sure if it's because of the vaccination or because of the variant type. So these are things we need to understand better.
But very glad to hear that you are seeing that tapering off.
Yes, we're really relieved about that, but I still need to stress we're talking about, you know, still 5 to 10% of people getting long COVID after an acute infection, which when we look at the numbers in the United States, that is enormous.
Yes, still a lot of people. All right, Dr. David Petrino, Joel, thank you both. And Joel, I know you're not 100% yet, but great to see you doing so well. Congrats on the Tony nominations, and excited to see you in action on Broadway in The Company. Thank you. Our coverage of 1 million deaths continues throughout the day here on ABC News Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. Elon Musk says he is still committed to buying Twitter after announcing his deal with the platform is on hold. The world's richest man tweeted today, quote, Twitter deal temporarily on hold pending details supporting calculation that spam and fake accounts represent less than 5% of users. The news caused Twitter's stock to fall 19% in pre-trading hours. Musk, who is in the process of buying Twitter for $44 billion, said days ago that one of his top priorities would be removing spam bots from the platform. Queen Elizabeth made her first public appearance in weeks today, meanwhile. The 96-year-old monarch was spotted driving through the Royal Windsor Horse Show 3 days after she was forced to pull out of the state opening of Parliament due to mobility issues. It's the first time she's been seen in public since her husband Prince Philip's memorial service in March. Coming up, we are celebrating Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Month with two brothers who are coming up, combining their heritage with their love of a popular pick-me-up. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are celebrating Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Month with two brothers who opened up a chai cafe in Manhattan. Ani and Ayan Sanyals grew up drinking chai tea courtesy of their parents who emigrated to the U.S. from India. Now the brothers are combining their love of the chai they grew up with the atmosphere of American and European cafes. And Ani and Ayan are actually here right now with me to tell us all about that. Ian, I want to start at the beginning. What inspired you to do this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a big coffee fan. I'm a coffee lover. I love going to cafes. And growing up, going to trips to India, I realized that this wonderful experience of getting chai, getting Indian street food that we had growing up with our family every time we went to India, you just couldn't find that experience in New York City, one of the most global cities in the world. And so we set out to really change that and build something that represented our traditions and our culture.
And I'm sure there are people listening right now thinking, well, I don't know, I've had chai tea before. I've seen it in lots of other places. But Ani, I know that you've said that you feel that chai is misrepresented in the U.S. a lot because traditionally it's not overtly sweet, but it often is when you get it here in the States. So why did you think it was so important to bring the traditional kind of chai that you were familiar with here?
Yeah, I think food is such an authentic avenue for carrying on tradition and heritage, and when things get lost in translation, it's never fun, and we felt like people that look like us, people that came from where we came from, why couldn't we be proud of our food? These things that have been carried down from our grandmothers to our parents to us, and it just didn't feel right, and so we wanted to take a stand against that, and we've been working hard every day to get it right.
And Ian, you say that your parents were incessant, quote, incessant chai drinkers.
Oh my God.
What was their reaction when you said, we're actually going to start a business with this?
I mean, being an Asian American, you have certain kind of tracks that your parents put you on, whether it's doctors or lawyers. We have these kind of stereotypes in our community. And now, ironically, we're selling chai. So they were definitely surprised at first, but I think they're definitely on board now.
What do they think now?
I think they're very, very proud. They're at home watching right now, so.
Ani, what's your message to other creators out there who might have an idea, but they just feel like, nah, that would never take off, particularly in the food and beverage industry?
Yeah, I think your culture is your most important perspective that you can bring. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you unique. And I think the most important thing is to just get started. So when you have that idea, you've been sitting on it, you're thinking about it, you got to get started. Take one step and take the next step from there. And we've been through a lot of ups and downs in these last 2 years of running a business in New York City. But I think one thing, we never stopped. We never got scared. We never got tired. We just kept going. And we're really excited about the future of this company.
Walk me through, if you don't mind me asking, some of the downs, because sometimes people hear stories like this and they just think, oh, well, you started here and it was up from there, and I started and I hit this roadblock, so maybe my business isn't meant to be. So walk me through some of the challenges that you've hit along the way. Ian.
Yeah, I think it was, obviously COVID was a big challenge that, we couldn't really have people inside the cafe, and for us, having community and being kind of like a place where people can come around and meet their friends, that was really tough for us to kind of switch to takeout and delivery. But we did it. We were delivering ourselves, coming up and down Manhattan, no traffic. It was amazing. But we kind of just saw it through the positive sides of every challenge that we faced.
Sort of roll through the punches in that way. Ani, any good surprises, things that sort of where it felt like luck was on your side and you thought, oh, okay, we can do this?
Yeah, I think the craziest thing was the love that we got from our community. I have a funny story that in the week after New York City was forced to shut down, our community stepped up and bought so many gift cards from us online. They paid our rent for 2-3 months after that. And so that just reminded me that, this was meant to be, and we just had to push through. And so, that's like one of those shining moments that I always go back to.
Well, the chai is delicious. You're both inspiring. Thank you both for coming on and telling your story with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis right after this.
Too often when we think of a veteran, we sort of have this image of what an American soldier looks like. And you don't often think of an Asian girl as an American soldier, but I was one.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.